In a simulation, we often are given the opportunity to give various sets of inputs into the simulation and then observe the resulting activity that occurs during the simulation and review the data that is output. In a simulation, there's a lot of logic that has to be baked into all the different moving pieces that we can then observe and take some sort of understanding from. When a simulation draws back far enough and our observability is at a high level, there may be quite a few things that we sort of chalk up to being random. But what randomness really is in a simulation is us saying, good enough. We can abstract the details from what's really going on below to some reasonably semi-unpredictable randomness. Many random generators are actually just very difficult to predict to humans, algorithms that use underlying very predictable things. They're just so deep down that we don't typically either understand them or care to take the time to figure out. When you write a random number generator, which could be used for determining a random anything, it has to start from somewhere. This is the idea of being actually pseudo-random. If random is really the result of something that is unpredictable, purely unpredictable, how can we use any algorithm to produce something that truly is unpredictable? An algorithm is fundamentally something that does something predictably. You just go low enough that we don't care and that we won't look and see what the answer actually will be ahead of time, therefore no longer being random. So it's kind of random because we won't predict it. And it suits our purposes. It suits our purposes in a simulation, like the number of people who visit a shop in a simulation for how buyers will go shopping to various stores in a city. We might simulate the urge for them to go by randomly saying from a statistical analysis that on certain days, X% of individuals go shopping for groceries. So we use that and we say that observation of these statistics gives us enough confidence to simply say, yeah, 50% of the people, I'm making up numbers, in this community on a Sunday will go shopping for groceries. So let's just randomly simulate half of them going shopping. And then you might have other decisions being made for how they'll choose which grocery store to go to. Somewhere along the line, you either say this person always goes to this store, or there's a statistical probability that they'll go to one or the other, and you use, again, a similar model to randomly determine which one they're going to go to. You see how here the idea of randomly selecting based off of some known probability is really just glossing over the details of the reasons that the person actually chose to go shopping at one grocery store as opposed to another, and for that matter, which individuals even went that day. It could be that the reason I go to one grocery store instead of another on a given day is because for that day, I realize certain items that I like to buy are actually limited in my pantry. And I find the ones that I like better at one store over another. So on that day, when I go to the grocery store, I'm more inclined to go to one over another, because that day, in that moment, the thing I need is actually at one store. But on a different day, there might be something else I need that I prefer from a different store, so I go to that one. But we're not simulating that level of detail. We're just glossing over and saying randomly, based off of some probability, I'll choose this one. But we could go deeper and we could say, well, these are the things in my pantry, and this is the weather. This is how far away that each grocery store is. This is my mood. All these things now could be used as concrete values to determine very predictably which store I'll go to. If I'm in a certain mood and it's not rainy, and I'm therefore okay with going to the store that's further because I just like that store more, then I might go to that one. But if it's rainy and I'm kind of in a bad mood, but I know I need to go shopping, I might just go to the one that's closer, even though it's not my preferred store. We could go even further with this and say, well, what determined my mood that day? How about we just randomize it? Let's say that I, statistically speaking, am in a happy and uplifted mood 70% of the time. That's just me, say. And then 20% of the time I'm kind of down, and 10% I'm somewhere in between. Well, again, that's just me randomly glossing over what impacts my mood. If I wanted to drill into that, I could go through the actual factors that are the things that play into my mood, like the weather. Now the weather actually has multiple impacts. It can impact my mood as well as my practical concerns for driving and safety. Not my mood, but related to the same activity, like going to a store. It could be the weather. It could be a discussion I had with a loved one the night before. It could be news that I heard that morning or recently. It could be some unknown variable mix of hormones that have adjusted in my body over the last day. It could have been what I ate last night. We can see how there could be absolutely dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of little tiny factors that now contribute to what mood I'm in. And I could define a concrete value, if I quantify on some sort of dynamic spectrum a mood. I could come up with that value. I could simulate it and say, this is what my mood would be given these factors. But then we could say, for this time frame, why did I have that conversation with a loved one? Why did that news occur? Why is the weather like this? And in the simulation, once again, we have to determine how much deeper do we go. Maybe we just roll a die, spin a wheel, flip a coin, make it random. So in that context, in a simulation, I'll reiterate that randomness is really just glossing over the details. Ideally to the level that it's okay for us to still gain value from the simulation. Perhaps we don't need to think about the smallest details to get really valuable information out of it. But perhaps we'd like to, because we can get a little bit more granular or nuanced. You'll notice that when we talk about this, we can start to think about how the inputs of our actual real lives, which are not simulated, have a lot of little tiny impacts, and some actually large impacts to little things around us. That when we zoom into the focus distance of our own life Lots of things impact us greatly. And those things are not random. They're circumstantial. Given enough data, they'd be predictable. One of the pieces of that puzzle, of course, that might be less predictable is just other people. Why we make a decision versus another sometimes seems completely erratic or irrational. But we could get close in many cases, and the more we understand certain people, we could begin to predict the way they would respond to certain things. And so we could kind of cobble together this understanding of what happens in our lives and how they affect us. If we zoomed out and tried to imagine our community with us just as tiny pieces that could be abstracted into just big statistical numbers, we might find ourselves overwhelmed by just how much is going on and how small we seem. If we zoom out to the scale of an entire nation or the entire world, the actions we take may seem infinitesimally small, to the degree that we might as well not think about them individually. And if this were a simulation, and we were curious about what happens globally when certain broad factors interact on a global or national or an international way, we might just randomize it. But again, this is not a simulation, and your perspective starts with right here. And so everything that does go on at your level of perspective is actually quite momentous and is reasonable to think it matters, because it does. When you do something, it impacts many, 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 many things and people that you're close to. And frankly, that's the only thing you can actually do. Perhaps with enough influence or wealth or power, you could have much more major impacts on larger groups of individuals. But at the end of the day, it still stems from your specific actions. So I think maybe it's really interesting to consider the broad experiment and to just wonder about how all the little factors do culminate to broader swings of activity in a statistical analysis. But you can control the things you can control. And it's still worthwhile to take note of that and to really consider those things. Because this isn't a simulation, and we won't just randomly pick what happened at the national level. Those things actually occur as a compounding of all the small things that every single one of us do. And so therefore, everything we do still is incredibly momentous and important.